Okay, I'd like to welcome you back to our second session of the Loved Ones group. We've been discussing so far the disease of addiction, talking about that definition. And again, if there was kind of one thing that I could, impress upon folks is that, this disease is first a part of the body. The body is the culprit in this in terms of who develops a problem with drugs and alcohol and who doesn't. But as we start to look then, we know that regardless of how it starts, what we know is it does progress. It gets progressively worse. And that is where we're going to see, again, family members become, kind of the target a lot of times of how this disease unfolds. And we will see family members being essentially kind of mystified by the whole process of what's happening to my loved one. And why is it happening to my loved one? And one of the most difficult parts of it is that whole idea that we all have this idea of what causes addiction, and it's most time wrong. Again, it's not being caused by how people are reacting to it. We also know that there's a lot of drama associated with alcoholism and drug addiction. And sometimes we tend to kind of even romanticize how addiction unfolds. You may read a story about some celebrity that, the most recent I saw was a sports figure that, came out and talked about their addiction to a particular drug. And in writing the article about that person, they started talking about all the pressure that was on them as a professional athlete. And they were talking about how they grew up. And they were talking about a lot of things that probably made sense in terms of how they were trying to explain why did this professional athlete develop a drug addiction. But again, from a disease standpoint, the pressure of being a professional athlete and how they grew up and all that didn't have anything to do with it, did it? No, it didn't have anything to do at all, because there's a lot of professional athletes that are under that same pressure and they don't have a drug or alcohol problem. That becomes the problem. If we start to try and say, well, if you grow up in a certain kind of neighborhood, or if you grow up with certain kind of emotional problems, or if you're prone to depression, or if you're the middle sibling in the family, you're more, if we start looking at any of those kind of things as the reason that somebody has a drug or alcohol problem, then what we see is that it just doesn't hold up, because there's a lot of people that have those problems that don't have drug or alcohol problems. So again, what we want to look at is that it's a disease that starts off nobody choosing to have it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person has any other, kind of problems. They may have, because a number of people that will, find themselves experimenting with alcohol come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of situations. And again, we will see that some people have this problem, this addiction. What I'm looking at now, what I have up here I want to talk about now in this session, is that we generally break addiction down into three stages: early, middle, and late stage. So as addiction, what we see is addiction for the person who is an addict, an alcoholic, it is progressing, it moves, it changes. And again, for family members, this becomes particularly a mystery and troubling, because family members are trying to look at their loved one just today. And it's like, well, how bad, what's going on today? How bad is this? Not knowing that a year from now it's going to be worse. 2 years from now it's going to be worse still. And then there might be times in the alcoholic or addict's life where it seems like it's not getting worse, like it's actually getting better. And again, that becomes part of how this disease works, is that there can be periods of time where it seems like things are okay. But what we know is then what we're going to look at this early stage, and again, in the very beginning of early stage addiction is that wow experience. That physiological, special, I loved it, I smoked this, I drank that, I took this, and I loved it. That was great. And again, that's the kind of an experience that starts off this disease. Now, what happens after that is very much what happens to any human being that has that kind of a wow experience. Think of some other wow experiences that don't have anything to do with alcohol. Don't necessarily mention them necessarily, but think of it. There are some other wow experiences that are very powerful, very powerful. Let's mention one. First time somebody falls in love. Okay, that's a wow experience, isn't it? I'm talking about that real thing. Powerful, very powerful. Well, what happens after we fall in love? Do we say, well, that was nice, I don't think I'll see that person anymore? No, we're really attracted, aren't we? It's like, I want to see that person, a lot. So we're attracted to that wow experience. The one we're talking about is the drug that we just took, But it could be any kind of wow experience. It's very naturally human for us to be attracted to whatever produces that kind of a wow experience for us. And again, all human beings know about that. We just got to put drugs and alcohol in that class. So there's going to be an attraction. Once there's that powerful attraction, we're going to form a relationship with that chemical. We're going to form a relationship with that chemical or with that person, whatever that wow experience is, we're going to form a relationship with that. Now, the way the relationship with drugs and alcohol might work is that all of a sudden the person who's had this wow experience starts looking for opportunities to have that wow experience again. It's like, when can I do that again? Well, I'm going to think about what kind of activities in my life can include that. So the person that, again, had that drinking experience as a result of going to a party may be attracted to going to another party. And they start to form a relationship with the chemical. In other words, we think about doing something as far as an activity. We think, does drugs and alcohol, does getting high, getting drunk fit into that experience? Does it fit? I know there was an old joke, about the guy that told one time he was in recovery and he said, I went fishing for the first time, since I've been sober. And he said, my God, it's the most boring thing I ever did in my life. I sat there for hours. But he said, but I used to love to go fishing when I was drinking because it provided a great opportunity to get drunk. But he didn't think he was going fishing to get drunk. He thought he liked fishing. Because we form a relationship. So we start connecting things. Sometimes we'll connect the drinking or drugging experience to certain people. I really love my friends. I got the best friends in the world. And then somebody might get sober and say, you know what, I haven't seen my friends. They don't come around anymore. They don't want anything to do with me now that I quit drinking. Well, what we find is that maybe those relationships weren't all that strong at all. It's just that the relationship kind of formed. There was a bond that happened between that. So again, we have this very powerful experience. We're attracted to it. We form a relationship to it. And when a relationship starts with drugs and alcohol, then other relationships have to change, right? First time you fall in love with somebody and you start dating this person you love. Do you want to spend as much time with your parents as you did before? No. Maybe some of your old hobbies start to kind of fall away. How much time do you spend with your friends? Not as much. So anytime this powerful experience comes into one's life, it changes other relationships very naturally. And again, all human beings know about this. Again, parents of teenagers can report this. My teenager got a driver's license, never saw him again. That's very natural because, again, they were attracted to this new experience and that changed other relationships. And again, so drugs and alcohol will change other relationships because a person starts to be attracted to the things that, again, fit within the drug or alcohol use experience. It also will, in the early stage, we will also see a change beginning in terms of emotionally. Now, nobody will point and say, well, I think my loved one is starting to have emotional changes because they're drinking and drugging. Again, in early stage, most of the time, nobody even identifies that drugs and alcohol could be having anything to do with any kind of change that's taking place. But the typical experience that even early stage drinking or drug use will cause emotionally is restlessness, irritability, and boredom. Restlessness, irritability, and boredom. And what that means is, again, it's not hard to see when we kind of think about it. If you've had this wow experience with drugs and alcohol, how do the other things in life look now? They kind of lose their luster a little bit, don't they? Because that was pretty powerful. So you may have friends calling you up and say, hey, do you want to go to the movie? Oh, well, I used to like to go to movies, but no, I'm going to this party instead. You want to hang around with me? No, I got this other person I'm going to hang around. All of a sudden, we start to, again, we're drifting toward this wow experience, which all of a sudden starts to diminish the pleasure that other experiences in life bring. And that's where the person with the drug or alcohol problem, and the person with the drug problem doesn't know this is happening. They just know that all of a sudden they're not as interested in some of these other activities like they used to be. They're more interested, again, in things that have to do with drinking or using. Again, restlessness, irritability, discontent, normal human experiences, but they will continue on. They will continue to grow for the person that has a drug or alcohol problem. One of the things that this wow experience does is the person has this wow experience and they say, gee, I'm going to fit this into the rest of into my normal flow of my life. I'm not going to quit going to school. I'm not going to leave my parents. I'm not going to drop my spouse. I'm not going to change my life. I'm just going to fit this experience into the rest of my life. And that's kind of what addiction says you can do. But again, addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And what it will eventually do is essentially say, no, even though you thought you could fit this drug or alcohol use into the rest of your life, what you find is that it won't let you. And one of the ways is it won't let you is, it starts to take the pleasure out of other things in life. When a person eventually gets into late-stage addiction, you will hear them describing things like, I got no pleasure out of anything other than drinking and using. And that's kind of like where it ends up eventually. And again, that's the kind of a thief that addiction becomes, but a person doesn't see that. And in the beginning, it's just restlessness, irritability, boredom, that starts to happen. Part of this is also brain chemistry. Remember, we were talking in the first session about how for the person with a drug or alcohol, with this disease, when they use the chemical, they get this powerful brain chemistry experience, right? It's a brain, wow, that's brain. That's the brain chemistry doing that. Well, what happens once the chemical's gone? The next day when we're not using? Remember the old saying, what goes up must come down. And again, for normal people, when they go out and they have a couple of drinks, they drink in a social way. Once the chemical's gone, they come back to normal, right? Not the case for those who have this addictive predisposition. They come back to below normal. So yesterday, here's how I felt. Here's what my mood was like as a normal person before I drink or use. But now that I'm drinking, I get this real high experience, this top of the mountain kind of wow experience. The next day when I come down off that chemical, I don't go back to the way I was over here. And those people with drug and alcohol problems can kind of testify to this, like, you know what, I was different after that. I wasn't the same. And again, that I come to below normal. So maybe there's a little bit of a depressive state, or maybe all of a sudden I'm not handling stress as well as I was before I started drinking. And all of a sudden changes emotionally start to happen. And the person doesn't know why. Doesn't know why that is. But when you return to less than normal, it sure makes getting high even more attractive, doesn't it? Life without drugs and alcohol doesn't feel very good. And the attraction to the chemical becomes even greater. We start to see the beginning of denial. And again, alcoholics and addicts are not the only people who experience denial. It's a human experience, very human. Anybody ever bring a boyfriend or girlfriend home that mom and dad didn't approve of? Oh yeah, people have had that experience. And mom and dad said, you know what, I know this might be a lovely person, but we don't really like them, and we just think this is bad for you. And you say to your mom and dad, you've just been the best parents in the world. I've always trusted your judgment. You're so wise. I'll end this relationship immediately.
Yeah, right.
Right, yeah, right, everybody's saying. No, that's not what we do, is it? No, what do? We defend. You're wrong. You're wrong about this. You're wrong. We defend that person. We defend, whatever fault they see, we're defending that fault. Or if we don't feel comfortable defending them, we might not argue, but then do what? See them anyway, right? Sneak around and see them anyway. So it's just according to how we're, But again, that's denial, isn't it? Somebody's trying to give us information about a problem. Were your parents generally right about that too? Yeah, doggone it. That's the worst part about it, is they were generally right too. But again, we get information that we don't want, and we ignore it. And that's the beginning. Again, denial is a human experience. All human beings do it. But we get information that we really don't want, that's contrary to what we want. If we're wanting to use drugs and somebody's trying to tell us something negative about drugs, again, we start to shut down. Now, this denial begins early on, and it usually begins within the alcoholic or addict themselves. In other words, we wake up with a big hangover as a result of all the drinking or drug use that we did. Even though the addict or alcoholic is different physically, they still can experience some pretty bad mornings at times, even early on. And, the first thought that came in was, my gosh, you shouldn't drink or use like that. You feel terrible. And then the next thought will be, no, it was probably something I ate. Or I won't do it like that again. Again, denial starts to developing really quickly in the mind of the person who has a drug or alcohol problem. Very early on. It's this counter message to the truth that starts to develop in the mind. It's this counter message. And again, a lot of people think it's lying. I heard somebody say that denial stood for don't even know I'm lying. And it's the truth. The addict or the alcoholic who is arguing about their drug use, minimizing how much they use or the consequences it causes, they're not lying. It's just that the denial process will progress to a place to where the person is not able to see the truth, not able to understand the truth. Tolerance is going to increase. Tolerance meaning, and this is physical, this is the body. And again, every addict or alcoholic will describe almost like a sad day. It's like, you know what, I drank a six-pack and I felt great, it was a wonderful experience, and then I drank a six-pack again and it didn't do a whole lot. I had to drink 8. Or I took this one pill and it just felt wonderful, and I thought that was going to be it. I could take one pill and feel great, and then I had to take 2 pills to get the same experience. That is an increase in tolerance. So the person's body is metabolizing the chemical differently than normal people, and it will continue to metabolize the chemical differently and require more of the chemical. That is the process of addiction. If it took 2, it'll take 3. And that'll also start happening in terms of how often. A person may go out and party on a Friday night and think, that was wonderful, now back to work, back to school, back to whatever, pick up my life again, and maybe I'll do that again next Friday or next month. And that might work for a while like that. And then it will eventually say, no, you know what, maybe I'll have to do that a little bit sooner. Maybe I'll do that every Friday night. But I won't do that during the week. I won't use during the week. And then all of a sudden, well, Wednesday night's that's kind of close to the weekend, So again, that's how the process works, because the body is now building a tolerance to the chemical, and it takes more of the chemical to get the experience, to get the same high, to get this wow experience. It takes more, and it will take it more frequently, because the body is also going to start adapting. We will see there's a lot of family confusion that goes on in early stage. This person is changing. The addict or the alcoholic is changing, and nobody really knows why. They just don't know why. The person's becoming different. There's conflict, there's secretiveness, there are changes happening emotionally. They're hanging out with different people. They're not interested in the same things. And so family members go through a real confusion as to what is really going on, with this person. But again, probably not thinking that drugs or alcohol is the cause. There may be some knowledge that the person might be doing some experimentation, but at the same time, they will not put it together necessarily. So a lot of times family members feel really guilty. It's like, well, I should have seen something earlier. My daughter, my son, my spouse, they've got this terrible problem with drugs and alcohol. I should have seen this earlier. Probably not. It would have been very difficult to see this earlier. First of all, the person is probably doing as much as they can to kind of keep this secretive from other people, this other kind of life that's starting to emerge here. And they don't want other people to know about it. And even if you saw what was going on, again, based upon our definition, an alcoholic is someone who lives in the park and drinks every day. A drug addict is somebody who's, shooting up with a needle every day, We would not call it addiction. We would probably call it something else. We wouldn't be able to see what it was. So this is early stage. Again, early stage is typified by there's not a lot of problems going on, but there's changes taking place. The person is forming a relationship with the experience of being drunk or being high. That is what the person is starting to gravitate toward. And normal is now becoming different. The experience of being without drugs and alcohol now doesn't feel the same as it did before the person first started experimenting. Any questions or comments about early stage? What early stage looks like and what happens there? Okay? It's kind of a mysterious time. The addict or the alcoholic certainly doesn't think that there's any kind of problem because there aren't any problems happening. don't see any potential for there being a problem. In fact, sometimes they may report that they're able to do things under the influence of drugs or alcohol that their friends aren't able to do. It's very common for a teenager who has a serious problem, to be, but might be kind of an early stage and their problem is just starting to develop. They'll essentially say, I couldn't be a drug or an alcoholic because I can drink more than my friends and get up the next morning and don't have a hangover and feel good and all that. And it's like, that's not normal. A person that drinks a whole lot should be sick. So what they're essentially reporting to you is that they're experiencing this thing differently, but they're reporting it like it's almost a gift. I'm able to drink a lot, have a good time, but no consequences. I don't get sick, I don't feel bad. The next day I'm able to kind of go about my business. And we will see that because of the stimulant effect that the drug brings. Now again, narcotic addicts oftentimes talk about this, is that that when they use the drug now, it's kind of like put me to sleep, I just kind of zone out. But in the beginning they talked about all the energy that narcotics brought. They were able to use a little, and they just had all this energy. They could go to work, they could clean house, they could, take care of kids, do all this stuff. And that's what the disease does in the early stage. In the early stage, it is very stimulating. That's the nature of it. It's this powerful stimulant, kind of regardless of what drug's being used. But we know that, again, it's going to change. As we move into middle stage, we move into problems. If you want to know when does someone move from early stage to middle stage, it's like, are there any problems going on? Are there consequences starting to happen? And if the answer is yes, then we're not in early stage anymore. We moved into middle stage. And what we can see happening here in middle stage is that things start to go wrong as a result of not necessarily the drug use. It can be directly related to the drug or alcohol use, like a DUI, a legal problem with a DUI. But it could be attitude. The person's attitude starts to change, so now they're having trouble getting along with other people. They're not doing very well on the job because of the attitude problem changes. Maybe they're not feeling as good physically. They're starting to feel some of the physical consequences of their drug and alcohol use, so they're not as good at school or their job or with their family responsibilities. So there are changes taking place that start to bring about problems. Legal, job, family, financial, things start to go haywire. But it might go haywire just a little bit, and there might not be a big crisis in the beginning, but there will start to be these crises that things start to go wrong. And it can be emotional. A person might start to experience depression, anxiety. Now, the first response is that I drink because of my problems. That is the kind of the upside down nature that we start to see. Families really become, prone to seeing it this way. My loved one is drinking or using because they're depressed. My loved one's drinking because they lost a job. Or they're using drugs more heavily because their loved one left them. Their significant other left them, left the relationship. Again, not connecting that, well, I wonder why they lost the job. I wonder why they're depressed. I wonder why their loved one left them. Well, maybe it was because of the drinking and drugging and the person that they were becoming as a result of that. So we will start to see, as these problems start to emerge, that they will be seen upside down. We call that alkalogic. Alkalogic is seeing the problem upside down. I drink because of my problems. And again, part of that may be true. In other words, as my problems emerge, what's my answer to them? I know a way to fix it. I'm depressed. I'm depressed because I'm drinking a depressant drug, ethanol. What can I do to make myself not be depressed? I can drink some more of that depressant drug and but I will get relief, won't I? Again, it really does work. It really does work. That's the one thing, again, that non-alcoholics can't understand. It's very hard to understand, is that if they have a problem and they drink or use a drug to try and fix that, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. They've still got the problem and they got the consequences of this drug. But it really does work for the person that has this physiology, that has this disease, at least in the beginning. A person will start to gravitate toward alcohol or drugs even more to deal with the problems that are being caused by drugs and alcohol. And again, but when this comes to being explained, it will look upside down. I'm drinking because of my problems. And the family will kind of see it that way. Also, what is kind of the nature of a family? What's the real benefit of having a family? To be helpful, to provide love and support. And again, when a family member has a problem, what is the most natural thing in the world to do? to help, to protect them, to help, to step in and try to provide some kind of assistance. That's a very natural thing to do. And most of the time it's helpful. It works. The person, we help family members get through a crisis. We help them deal with some kind of a problem. But what if it's addiction that's causing the problem? If it's addiction that's causing the problem, then what we see happen is the family now has been drawn into what we will call an enabling process or a rescuing process that will begin early on. It may be helping to pay the cost of that DUI that I got, or it may be fixing that other financial problem, or it may be watching my kids because I'm kind of emotionally distraught for some reason, or it may be helping me, while I find a new job because I lost the old job. So the family will step into these early crises and try to fix, try to protect, and try to rescue, and will successfully do that. But it's going to set up a pattern that won't end. Again, if it was not addiction, then the crisis solving and all that would be helpful and it would probably end. But because it's addiction, it won't end. We will see an increase in tolerance in middle stage. Again, the amount that has to be used and how often will start to increase. So the weekend drinker will now start drinking during the week. The person who's drinking in the evenings after work will eventually start drinking during work, and the person who's drinking during work will eventually have to take a drink in the morning. That may take years to play out like that. With some drugs, it will happen much more rapidly. Alcohol by itself is a fairly slowly progressing disease. But we know now that very few people just use alcohol anymore. It's almost always a part of something else. We know that marijuana masks the toxic symptoms of alcohol use. So somebody who's drinking and smoking pot, it'll progress more rapidly because it's masking those negative symptoms, and the person's able to drink more. And we know that narcotics, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, those have a very rapid progression. So a person might start using, in 1 year they may see their disease progress from early stage to middle stage to late stage, very rapidly for some people. So this increase in tolerance. We're also in middle stage going to start to see the experience of craving. Now, the person in early stage was attracted to getting high, that experience that they loved. But at the same time, it was the experience. In middle stage now, it's going to start being, I don't feel normal unless I am using, unless I have some of the chemical. All of a sudden, the craving, the body will start prompting, the physical body will start prompting the person to want to use. We will see brain chemistry starting to adapt. In other words, we were talking in the first session about how brain chemistry is kind of a precursor to this disease, some difference and some variations. What we will see now is that because of the use of drugs and alcohol, the brain chemistry now is starting to experience perhaps depression, mood changes, mood swings, anxiety. And how do we try to solve those problems when we're experiencing them? We drink. We drink again. Again, if I'm experiencing those emotional changes and all of a sudden I'm not handling stress very well, like I was, all of a sudden I'm not able to deal with stress like I used to be able to. And again, the reason, brain chemistry, and the person's going to be even more attracted to using because that'll fix the problem. One of the most painful things for family members to experience is that it has to do with role and relationship. If you're in a marriage to someone, there might be a little bit of role involved there. In other words, one spouse has certain responsibilities, maybe a little bit more than the other, but you really want a relationship. You really want a relationship. And if you're a parent and you're raising your child and they're becoming an adult, you really want that role that you have with them, which might have been to provide them with everything they need, money and shelter and all this stuff. You really want that to change and turn into a relationship. As a parent, you don't want to be parenting an adult child. But one of the things that happens as a result of this disease is that family members get stuck in their role. If their role was, to be a parent, then the addict or alcoholic might be 30 or 40 years old, but the family member is stuck in their role as that parent. And I learned this by taking phone calls from people who would be saying, I really need some help for my son or daughter. And we'd be talking, and I think, well, this person must be about 14 or 15 years old, the way they're talking about them, only to find out, and I might say something like, well, what kind of an adolescent program do you think they might be willing to participate in? And they say, oh, wait a minute, my son's 40 years old. You know, and it's like, oh, okay. But again, they were in that role. They were still in that role in terms of they were taking care of them like a parent. They were worrying about them. They were thinking for them. We talk about that sometimes, becoming the addict's brain. In other words, there might be a family member around the addict or the alcoholic who is essentially their brain, does their thinking for them, worries for them, tells them when bills are due, tells them what kind of problem might be happening if they don't take care of things, reminds them, encourages them, cajoles them into action. And again, this becomes a role that a family member starts to play. And it's a very painful role, because the more role that is experienced, the less relationship is experienced. And this is typified by family members saying, the only time I hear from them is when they need something. Again, and every family member will have perhaps a different role. There might be one family member that's role is to provide money. They're the source of money. I can go to this family member for money. There might be another that I go and I share all my problems with. They become my counselor. And that role might feel pretty good to someone. It's like, well, my son, my daughter, my spouse, they come to me and they talk and they share all their problems. But again, not realizing that that's part of this role that helps to perpetuate the disease, that helps the person to stay sick, because the person's never getting confronted with the fact that what's causing the problems is the drugs and alcohol. It's not the life circumstances that's causing the problem. It's the problem of addiction that's causing everything else to happen. But this is very, very painful for family members, because as the disease progresses and gets worse, then all that's left is the role. What is it that I do? Am I the one that comes and gets them out of jail? Am I the one that provides money? Am I the one that talks, into the night when they're having a problem? Am I the babysitter? Am I this? Am I that? And that's the only thing that the addict or alcoholic will eventually need them for. Not because the addict or alcoholic doesn't care and doesn't love them. Again, they're being taken hostage by a disease. And that disease needs support. It needs people doing certain things when they need it, how they need it. And again, that is what will happen within this role and relationship. And every family member has to explore and investigate, what is my role with the addict or alcoholic? What is it that I do with them? Because that's going to be key as we start to look at how can we help somebody get into recovery. Another thing that family members experience all the time that's very painful as well is they find themselves on this teeter-totter of anger and pity. For however angry a family member gets at their loved one who has a drinking or drug problem, they will immediately or very closely that will be very closely followed by pity. So the addict or alcoholic may do something, and the family member gets very angry, very frustrated, and it's like, I'm not going to help, I'm not going to get you out of jail, I'm not going to pay that bill for you, I'm not going to rescue you from this. But for however angry they are, it will be followed very quickly by that feeling of pity. I just can't stand the thought of them being down at that jail. I can't stand the thought of them not being without money. I can't, and all of a sudden, whatever it was they were trying not to do, they will do, because they will start feeling sorry for the addict or alcoholic. And the disease of addiction learns that and knows how to manipulate family members through the use of pity or guilt, in terms of knowing what it is that family members respond to in terms of this disease. And it will get worse and worse as the disease progresses. But again, anger and pity become very painful for family members, because they think that they have made a decision to take some kind of action, only to find that they can't, because they're going to end up feeling sorry for them. Family denial is very powerful. For however powerful the denial process is for the addict or the alcoholic, it is just as much so for the family. You will see families often keeping secrets, not wanting to talk to other people about this problem. I know in my own neighborhood where I grew up, there were 5 families that had somebody that with active alcoholism or drug addiction. But none of us ever talked about it, and I never saw that until I was an adult, being able to look at the families in the neighborhood, but nobody talked about it. Nobody identified it, because it becomes a family secret. And addiction loves secrets. It depends upon them. Because we're ashamed. We think that addiction is a character flaw. It's a sin. We don't see it as a disease, and because we don't, then we tend to not want to talk about it. Now, if our loved one had cancer or heart disease, we might talk about it very openly. But when it's addiction, it's like we're ashamed of it, and as a result, that plays right into the progression of this disease. Because if we're not talking about it, if we're not identifying it, then we're also going to be enabling it to continue. I can remember I had a family member, a mother, one time I was talking to, and she was giving me a whole list of problems that her loved one was causing. And it was an adult daughter. And it was just this whole list, of jail and money problems and all, just a whole list of things. And as we got down to, after hearing all that, I said, well, what about drinking and drug use? And it's like, well, yes. And I think, well, do you think they may be alcoholic? And they said, oh, no, please, not that on top of everything else. And that's the experience that the family has. It's like, that's kind of like the worst thing. Family members tend to not see it as the cause of the problems that's going on. Family members tend to see it as just another big problem that's being laid here that we really need to keep a secret. Triangulation is an experience that family members have, and what that means is that the addict or alcoholic is able to create conflict within the family in a way as to keep the heat off the addiction. And what that is like picture a triangle, and at the top of the triangle you have the addict or the alcoholic, and say over here we have two parents. The goal of addiction is to keep these two people fighting. As long as these two people are fighting, then we're not going to really address the addiction. So wherever you see addiction, you're going to see at least a couple of family members that are really not getting along over this. And oftentimes it brings about severe family conflict. You will see two parents fighting and not being able to get along to the point of perhaps getting divorced, over all the conflict that is being created. And again, the addict will be manipulating each person. To try and, again, create this conflict in order that the heat stays off of them. It might be the parents fighting against the legal system. It's not uncommon to see, the parents are going to go down, they're going to fight with the probation officer, the police department, or whoever that's brought about a consequence. We're going to ride to the rescue here and go fight somebody. And in that fight, the addict or the alcoholic gets off. Whatever problem has been created is going to get lost and ignored. So triangulation will happen. And again, family members, you may have a dozen family members involved in an addict or alcoholic's life, and they all have a different opinion about what's going on. They're all arguing with each other, and any effort to try and get people to agree to be helpful is difficult because the addict is all the time kind of stirring things up. I've already mentioned that the family members will have problems being able to see their loved one at the right age that they are. That's the reason I said that one particular parent saw their 40-year-old son, but when they talked about him, it sounded like you were talking about a teenager. Age regression is something that happens very naturally in addiction. One of the things that we know is that when drug and alcohol use starts, emotional maturity stops. Now, all kinds of other maturing may continue to go on. The person may continue to get intellectually smarter. They may become very skillful in lots of different things, but emotionally they are going to struggle to continue maturing. And it's very simple as to why that is. When a person has experienced this wow experience in their life, and then they go off to experience the rest of their life, and they experience disappointment, failure, what are they going to do? They're going to take a drink because why? It works. So a teenager goes off to college and they're homesick. And a lot of the kids are homesick. But the way our teenagers are going to deal with being homesick is that they're going to take a drink or they're going to take a drug because that works for them. But they're also not going to learn how to deal with being homesick, are they? They're just not going to learn how to do that. And that's what happens over and over again. Some kind of disappointment comes into their life, and they're able to drink and make that essentially go away. But they also don't learn how to deal with disappointment either. You will hear people talking in early recovery saying that the hardest thing about being in recovery is dealing with life on life's terms, because they're not used to doing that without the experience of the drug or the drug to be able to kind of temper that or buffer their experience with that. So we see then again that for the family members, they will have a very difficult time seeing their loved one as the appropriate age. They will find themselves essentially treating their spouse like another one of the kids. being responsible for them, taking care of them, making excuses, doing all the things that you might do for a child, or you will see an adult child being taken care of very much like they were still a teenager. In middle stage, we're going to see the beginnings of the more severe withdrawal symptoms that will start to present themselves. It may start off as something as simple as tremor, craving, but we're going to see that withdrawal symptoms are going to get worse, and withdrawal symptoms start to prompt drug use. In other words, my body doesn't feel good. I can make the body feel okay, at least normal, by taking a drink or the drug. So withdrawal symptoms start to become more severe, and they also start to connect to how often the person uses. The drug starts to determine the person's drinking or drug use. In other words, a person may say, I'm only going to drink on the weekends, or I would never miss work, I would never miss school, I would never not be able to take care of my kids, but all of a sudden the withdrawal symptoms will start, essentially determining when the person drinks or when they take a drug. We will also see that these emotional things like depression, anxiety will start to deepen because the person, again, from a brain chemistry standpoint, is starting to become impacted more and more all the time. And we will start to see in middle stage addiction the efforts on the part of the addict to quit or to control their drug use. Trying to control a person's progression is something that starts to happen pretty early on for somebody who has an addiction. But again, it might be secretive. The family might not see this person who's trying to control, may not even see efforts to try and quit, but that usually becomes a part of what middle stage addiction is about as well. And we will start to see in middle stage addiction a real experience of joylessness. In other words, the things that used to bring pleasure in life now don't bring much pleasure at all. Oftentimes, the only thing that brings much pleasure is when the person is able to drink or use. And the other things in life become tasks. This is where family members have to be careful when they're trying to perhaps talk their loved one into, to quitting. If you quit, you can go back to school, you can take care of your kids, you can go to church, they'll start listing all the things that bring them pleasure. Family members will list those things. But to the addict or alcoholic, those things may not sound attractive at all because of what addiction has done to that person. Again, addiction has caused those things in life to become tasks. They may try to do them. They may try to take care of their kids, go to work, do all that stuff. But again, it doesn't bring pleasure like it does to other people. Now, in recovery, those things will start to bring pleasure again. But as the disease is progressing, that joylessness with other things in life becomes very troublesome for the person with an addiction. And again, becomes very mystifying to family members trying to understand it as well. We will also see that some typical things that will start to happen to the addict is that they will become self-will run riot. That's a phrase right out of literature from Alcoholics Anonymous. Self-will run riot, meaning they will have a very difficult time being able to see how their decisions are impacting other people. There is a selfishness and a self-centeredness that becomes a part of this disease. Oftentimes family members think that the addict just absolutely has lost the ability to love. Just doesn't care about them. In fact, may even hate them as a family member, and that is absolutely not the case. What is the case is that this disease is essentially taking over the person's life, and the acquisition and the use of the drug is becoming the most important thing. And so family, friends, other loved ones have to essentially take a back seat to the chemical. That's not a choice that the person makes. In fact, the addict or alcoholic usually feels a great deal of guilt and shame about those kind of things that are happening, but they are losing the ability to control that. The addict or alcoholic is experiencing what we call powerlessness. They are becoming powerless over the chemical. Day by day, week by week, month by month, they are becoming much more powerless, unable to control their behavior under the use of the chemical, and they are becoming much more selfish and self-centered as a result of that power of that chemical. And again, this is very, very difficult for family members to experience because it seems like the person doesn't care about them because of all the stuff that's happening. In late stage, we're going to see physical adaptation. Alcoholics Anonymous has the best way of saying it. Back here at early stage, the person lives to drink. Just lives to drink. It's just like, it's great. I just live for that party. Out here at this stage, the person is drinking to live. Their body is saying, if I don't have the chemical present, I'm going to go into withdrawal, I'm going to be sick, I'm going to be miserable, I can't function without the chemical. The physical body has adapted to the chemical. And we will start to see severe withdrawal symptoms. So if the person says, well, I'm not going to use, they will pay a price for that. And at this point, by the late stage, they will not be able to tolerate that price. There'll be too much physical pain. With narcotic addiction, it might be severe physical pain. With alcohol, it might be delirium tremens, severe seizures, severe withdrawal symptoms. Different drugs have different types of withdrawal symptoms, but by late stage, these are all very severe, very painful, very discomforting, a state of misery that the person is not going to be able to stay out of, except they know that they can take the drug and make it go away. We will also see in late stage a decrease in tolerance. Tolerance has been increasing all through early and middle stage. How much of the drug is required, how often they use it. When they get to late stage, oftentimes the tolerance will start to nosedive. This is where you will see an alcoholic go into DTs, not because of how much they're drinking, but by how much they're not able to drink. They may take a drink and get sick because their liver is not metabolizing the chemical like it once did. And now, instead, they are not able to metabolize it, so they take a drink and they get sick. And so they go into withdrawal, maybe into DTs, simply because they can't get the chemical in their body because their tolerance won't. You may see a narcotic addict overdose at this point. They took the same amount of the drug today as they had been taking, but their tolerance is going down and they overdose as a result of that. Again, it may not have had anything to do with using more. It may have been the same amount or even less, but their body's not tolerating it any longer. We will see health consequences in late stage, some pretty severe health consequences that start to happen as the body starts to break down as a result of addiction. And we will start to see back here we had a lot of denial. In early and middle stage, if you talk to the person, they're going to say, no, it's not my drinking or drug use, and it's somebody else's fault. This is a disease of blame. It's going to be blaming someone. There's something to blame. There's some other person, circumstance, even bad luck is to blame for this disease. But what we will see out here in late stage is the person might not be denying their drug and alcohol problem, but they've reached a point where I'm hopeless. I can't quit. There's nothing I can do about this. So I don't have a problem. I've got such a bad problem I can't quit. That's the way this disease progresses for the person. And again, there may still be denial present, but there's a feeling of hopelessness that starts to build and an absolute experience of joylessness. And now the joylessness has to do with, I can't get this experience anymore either. Most of the time, the addict or the alcoholic, by the time they've gotten out to middle stage, and definitely by late stage, the ability to get high, to get that wow experience is gone. And you would think, well, that's a perfect time to stop. If you're not getting that wow experience any longer, why not quit? But the problem is that the body won't let the person quit by this time. The disease has the person under control. The person is powerless at this point to be able to drink, to stop drinking or stop using without help. These three stages happen to everybody, but they don't always happen in the same way. We see some people moving through this very rapidly, some people more slowly. We see people, again, they might be progressing, and then they may seem to get better for a period of time. They may find some way of controlling. We'll see people switching drugs, perhaps. Hey, my problem was alcohol, so I'll just start smoking pot. You call that the marijuana maintenance program. It doesn't work very well, but people try it. People may say, well, you know what, I didn't really have a problem. I started messing around with those narcotics or that crack cocaine, so I'll just get off that and start drinking. And so, people will try to control and slow this process down. But regardless of what a person does to try and control it, it's uncontrollable. They might be able to slow it down in some ways, but it will continue to get worse and worse and worse. So these three stages, people move through them all unless they quit somewhere else in here. And again, a lot of people that enter into recovery come to recovery from middle stage addiction. Here's where they get it. Why? Because we've changed the definition of an alcoholic or drug addict. The first people who got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous 70 years ago were almost all late stage. They were almost all very far gone in terms of their disease. But what they did is they shared their stories. And in their stories they found out, we didn't start off out here. We were all back here and here and here, someplace else. And so what we're finding is that if we can get the truth to people, get the people exposed to the fact that this is a progressive disease that started way back here when the first experimented, then people can come into recovery much earlier because they were able to change their definition of what an addict is, change their definition of an alcoholic. It's not the person under the bridge. It's not the person necessarily even that's drinking every day, because that's not how that person always looked. And so the more definition we can change, the more chance we have of bringing somebody into this earlier in terms of being able to expose them to the truth, help them be able to experience their own consequences, which again we're going to talk a lot about, because one of the things that we know is that no one recovers unless they're experiencing their own consequences of this disease. And they can recover much earlier because of knowing that these symptoms don't have to play out to late stage. We can identify this disease much earlier. Let me stop there and see if we got any questions or comments about what we've been talking about here so far. Yes.
So people can be craving and not even really know it consciously.
Can people be craving the chemical and not even really know it consciously? Absolutely. And most of the time when people first start to look